Hello, this is Virginia Dives, co-director of the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. Today we're going to be talking about how to develop a group in your community, how to bring together caregiving and transportation. If you're listening to this PowerPoint presentation, it means that you have already watched two videos that we have as part of session 2 of the course that were filmed in Prince George's County, Maryland. In that event, we brought together caregivers and transportation folks for a discussion on transportation for persons with dementia. So today I want to talk about how to make a similar event or your own unique event happen in your own community. First of all, I think it's really important to know what you want to have happen in your own community. Bringing together caregivers and folks in the transportation profession can be challenging because you don't typically think about these two groups in the same breath. It can also, as I hope you saw from the Prince George's event, be very rewarding. So it's very important to start out with what you want to have happen. So are caregivers in your own community burdened with providing transportation for their loved ones? Have individuals who are living with dementia had negative experiences when using transportation services, whether we're talking about public transit or other kinds of transportation services? Have transportation providers expressed any concerns about some of their riders who are living with dementia and asking for advice about how to better serve those folks? Or do you simply want to know more about community transportation options as a possible resource for caregivers? There are some other important questions to answer once you decide what you really want to accomplish. Why you need to know and be able to articulate why this is important, who in the community can make it happen, how you're going to go about making it happen, and at the end of it all, how you will know that you have been successful. It's also very important to define community. So in my opinion, community can be a local community, it can be a town or a county, it can be a more regional effort that may include several counties, or it can also include the whole state. So it's very important to know what your community is because that will impact your focus and the scope of the work, and definitely who needs to be involved. So going back to that first question, what do you want to make happen? It's also important not just to know what your overall goal is, but also some of the practical issues involved in that. Do you want to build a relationship between caregiver support and transportation in your community? Is there already a dementia-friendly community effort? Or is that something that doesn't exist right now? Have you made contact with the caregiver support programs in your area? And do you know the transportation folks? So if you want to primarily build a relationship, one way to go about that is certainly to hold a community meeting, but it's certainly not the only way to do it. The other important aspect of this is building knowledge about what the needs and issues are in your community. And to do that, it's important to obtain feedback from caregivers, from people living with dementia, from other older adults and people with disabilities in your community, and from the transportation network of providers, so that you have a better sense at the beginning, either before you plan a community meeting or instead of planning a community meeting, just more specifically what the issues are. As you could see from the Prince George's video, knowing those issues really does take talking to people who are living this, who are facing these struggles every day. It really does help to put a face on the issues that you want to address and what you want to make happen in your community. It's also important to identify through this process some of the challenges and some of the potential workable solutions that may address those challenges. And if you want to, at the end of the day, if you feel like there are certain things wrong with the services that are being provided, or if you'd like to see improvements in them, or you'd like to see the services become more dementia-friendly, include that in your laundry list of things that you want to make happen. Okay, why is this important? So again, it's really important to know what the problem is that you want to solve, but going back to something I said at the beginning, it's also important to know what your end is going to be. So start with what you want to see happen at the end of this process, because engaging in this kind of an effort takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of work. It's not something that can happen overnight. So it's really important to know at the end of the day, what is your end? What do you want to see? And finally, I would urge folks to carpe diem, to seize the day, to take advantage of any opportunities that come your way. Is there a funding opportunity or a grant announcement that you've seen that something like this effort might fit into perfectly? Has there been a news item in your newspaper that really riveted people in your community and caused folks to feel like this is an issue whose time has come, it's time for us to work on it? Is there a particular champion, somebody who has a great reputation in your community that everybody knows, and who is willing to take this on? Or has there been a big complaint? And sometimes those hit the news, sometimes they don't. But somebody among your acquaintance or among your colleagues may have noted a big problem that may need to be resolved. So all of these things can tell you that it's time to work on this issue. And seizing the moment can really help you move ahead more quickly. So next, who can make it happen? And this is really, really important. Not just individuals, but also organizations whose leadership is going to be essential to your success. So who are the leaders in caregiving in your community? As I asked before, is there a Dementia Friends organization? Who are the leaders in transportation in your community? And one other critical player is a mobility manager or someone in a similar position in your community. In a nutshell, mobility managers are folks who work with the community and with individuals, helping them identify transportation options that may work for their particular situation. Mobility managers are also important for helping to pinpoint where there are gaps in services in the community. So they're really critical players. If there isn't a mobility manager in your community, maybe that's something you want to work on, but there may also be other specialists who know the transportation system. They may work for the Area Agency on Aging, for the Center on Independent Living, for any number of places in the community who are experts and who can really provide a lot of essential information. So how will you proceed? Well, first of all, if you've got the right leaders at the table, it's very important to cultivate their leadership and their commitment, but to also recognize that leaders may emerge from your group. people who may not be well known in your community, but who are willing to make a strong commitment and really lead some of this effort. So be on the lookout for those kinds of folks. Also, it's important to form some kind of structure. A committee is one way to go, and ensure that people who are coming together to make your event or to make the improvement in your community happen, people have to be willing to take on some of the work. So make assignments. Somebody needs to be in charge, or a small group of people need to be in charge. It's also important to make a plan and know who is going to do what, when, where, and how. And to consider, if you make a really good plan, is everyone who needs to be at this event or participate in this effort, are they going to participate? Are they going to come to your event? And if not, what do you need to do to make sure that the right people get to the table, that people will participate? And finally, it's important to recognize that all of this is going to take time and a lot of hard work. So you need to know that going in. I also want to point out, and I'm sure many of the folks who are listening to this presentation who are taking this course already know this. You know that you've got to pay attention to details. If you've got experience planning meetings or trying to develop a consortium or a collaboration in your community, then you know that the details really can be consuming. And if you don't pay attention to the details up front, then chances are you're going to be very sorry at some point in the process. So it's best to think about and plan the details as much as possible. It's also important to choose a meeting place that is physically accessible, that people in wheelchairs, who use walkers, who are vision impaired, who are hearing impaired, that they can easily access the building and that there's transportation access to the building. Now, as much as I'd like to say you should always, under all circumstances, make sure that it's accessible to public transit, that may not be a feasible option for everyone to travel to this meeting. And so it needs to be accessible to a variety of transportation resources to the greatest extent possible. It's also important that the location be comfortable and attractive if you're doing a meeting, because people are going to be there for a few hours. And they also need to know, when you invite them to come to this event, that you've thought enough about it and you've thought enough about making it a special event, that they're interested in coming, that they want to come, that they feel appreciated. Respite care is an absolute necessity. We're talking about bringing caregivers to the table. And you can't bring caregivers to a meeting unless they have respite. It would be ideal if you can provide respite care on site, that the venue that you choose is sufficiently large that there's an area where respite care can be provided. But definitely think through how respite care is going to be provided and understand that there's a cost related to that. Food is also something else that has cost related to it, but it's also a necessity. If you want folks living in the community who are doing caregiving every day, whose responsibilities are sometimes overwhelming, and you want them to come for 2 or 3 hours and spend time talking about these issues, then you want them to be comfortable, you want them to feel appreciated, and you don't want anybody to arrive or go away hungry. So food is absolutely necessary. And finally, and this is something that really I shouldn't say is a finally, make sure everybody can hear and understand who's coming to the meeting. Are you going to use mics? I highly recommend that you do use microphones. And make sure that the sound system is good and that everybody knows how to use it, so that everybody in the room can hear. Also, are you going to have people who are deaf and hard of hearing? Is it necessary to have a sign language interpreter? Does everyone who comes to this meeting speak English as their first language, or will there be people who really will need foreign language translation? If that's the case, think about how you're going to plan it. Get some expert advice from the community where folks come from. So if it's a Hispanic community, if it's a Chinese community, then consult with the leaders in those communities and get them involved to the greatest extent possible. Also, in the details, it's important to select the right mix of speakers. You see that in the Prince George's video that we included an individual who was living with dementia, a person who's a caregiver, and then we had representatives from 3 different transportation programs. And I must say, one of the things that I found impressive in that particular meeting, and this was really a community meeting that was planned by folks in the community, that they really had previous conversations with all these folks. Everybody kind of understood what it was that they were going to be talking about, and people were very receptive to what other people said. So there was little or no defensiveness. Nobody felt like they were there just to defend the great service that their agency or organization offered, but they wanted to be sure that people understood what was available, and they understood that if they need help, they could get help. They all provided handouts that were available to all of the participants. It's also important to ensure that what the presentations say, assuming you have 3 to 5 presentations, or maybe only 1 and 2, that it really enforces the purpose of this meeting, the overall purpose that you want to accomplish. And make sure, above all, that your speakers know how to use all of the equipment. If they're going to use PowerPoint, that they know how to use whatever equipment you're bringing to the meeting, as well as microphones, and that they know to speak into the microphones. That's critical. If you're going to use small groups, it's important to select and prepare your facilitators so that they know what their role is and that they're prepared to take it on. And plan the discussion, and that includes coming up with questions for discussion, timing, note takers, reporting out how that's going to happen, and that there's some way of capturing that information so that it can be summarized for the participants. And decide up front how you're going to use this feedback that you get from participants. Is it going to help you with your relationship building? Is it going to help you address some of the service issues? What do you plan to do with it? Finally, how will you know that you are successful? Did you get the results that you were hoping for? That's the critical question. So it is important to have some sort of standard evaluation. You can obtain feedback from participants by asking them really just a few multiple choice questions and then giving them the opportunity to write out more. It's also important to debrief with other planners and speakers so that you all discuss honestly and openly with one another what worked well, what didn't work so well. There are some included in the supplemental materials that are part of this course. We include a couple of sample evaluations with questions that you certainly may borrow and use or make your own. It's also important to know whether or not at the end of this effort, you've really managed to form some relationships, some alliances. Will there be ongoing work going on between the caregiver community on the one hand and the transportation community on the other? And consider, and this is really also important, what are your next steps? What's the next thing that's going to happen? Someone who attended the Prince George's meeting, and I don't believe it's included in the video, started talking about, well, when we do this next year, I thought that was really a terrific statement about the value of the meeting, and that there was enough enthusiasm on the part of participants in the room to think about coming together again to see how things are going. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation and thank you for your attention.